Good evening, everyone. It's really great to be here and welcome to this Meet the Lib Dems event for supporters of the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill. It's going to be a great opportunity today. We've got a wonderful panel and some fantastic questions to explore together to learn about the bill and to learn about how Liberal Democrats can make a real difference to the campaign for this incredibly important legislation. So my name's Zoe and I'm really very grateful for being able to have the opportunity to chair this evening with you with such a wonderful panel. So without further ado, I'd like to just introduce very briefly our panel and then hand over to each of them to introduce themselves in a little bit more depth. So we have Sarah Olney MP, who is Liberal Democrat Speaker and lead for energy and climate change in the House of Commons. We have Lord Oates, Johnny Oates with us, who's Liberal Democrat lead for energy and climate change in the Lords. We have Jackie Hook, who is councillor for the Teignbridge District Council and lead for executive member for climate change. And we have Sarah Lunnon, who is coordinator for the CEE Bill Alliance itself. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over initially to Sarah Lunnon to introduce herself and to give us a little bit of context and background on the bill. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks very much, Zoe. Well, a bit more about me. In the past, I've been a historic building surveyor. I have been an elected local authority councillor. I spent some time working with the Extinction Rebellion, and I'm now part of the CEE Bill Alliance, acting as a coordinator and working on various campaigns with them. A little bit more background about the bill. The Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill, it seeks to use the levers of power, the levers of government power that already exist to protect the future of life on Earth. So it seeks to be transformational, it's not revolutionary. If law, it would require communication about the current precarious situation we're currently in, accepting where we are now, what we face, and then mobilising for the result that is needed, not what is politically credible. So, given the radical nature of the changes that the bill, given the radical nature of the changes, the bill requires the integral involvement of the public. We have to take people with us. The changes are so great that we cannot impose these from a top-down, in a top-down manner, in a way that much of our law is made. So in legitimising the actions, that's what we seek to do. We do that via deliberative democracy and a citizens' assembly. Elegant and transformational. The main points of the bill are that the Prime Minister must declare a climate and ecological emergency, so that the UK sets a legal target, a budget, to achieve its fair share of the CO2 reductions needed. And that includes consumption emissions. And it also looks at the use of nets and limits the use of nets so that we actually pull in and squeeze the carbon budget so that it's fair and it's what's needed. It seeks to restore and regenerate ecosystems and biodiversity, which will also optimise carbon sink capacity. And it also sets up a citizens' assembly, working with government, not replacing government, working with government. And the Citizens' Assembly recommendations would form part of the strategy to ensure the UK achieves its objectives. The bill has been drawn up with input from respected academics, from earth scientists, ecology, and democratic studies. So the profs have provided the academic gravitas. The establishment push will be provided by those on the panel with me tonight, and the Alliance will help deliver the public mandate for the bill. So that's my introduction, Zoe. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I appreciate that. It's really good to have a little bit of recap or grounding on the background to the bill before we go much further. I'd like to hand to Sarah Olney this time to introduce yourself and say a little bit about why you support the bill personally.
Thank you very much, Zoe. So I'm Sarah Olney. I'm MP for Richmond Park, obviously for the Liberal Democrats. My current run as MP started December 2019, but I was previously MP for a short while between December 2016 and June 2017. As Zoe said in her introduction, I am the common spokesperson for the climate emergency for the Liberal Democrats. And one of the reasons that we're all of us as a party, all of the Lib Dem MPs are supporting this bill. But I think for me personally, the big achievement of this bill is that it's bringing the climate and the ecological emergencies together. And currently, they're very much divided, they're very much separate, rather, in government thinking. Responsibility for the climate emergency sits with the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and responsibility for environmental matters sits with DEFRA, the Department for the Environment, Farming and Rural Affairs. And I find personally that having that division in terms of who's responsible in government is really, really unhelpful in terms of trying to push forward action on climate change. And it's not just that those two elements are separate. It's just that if you push the government at all on its plans for net zero carbon, you find that it's split even further. So there's a bit in BEIS, there's a bit for the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government when we're talking about retrofitting homes. There's obviously Department for Transport has a large role to play, and countless other government departments. So for me, I think the real value of the CEE bill is that it brings all of those diverse elements that we need to address if we're to get to net zero carbon and if we're to transform our environment. It brings them together. It looks at them in the round, says this is a single problem, many different aspects. But that's what I think I would really like to see the government doing more than anything else, is to bring it all together in a single department with a cabinet minister to say, you're responsible for this. How are we going to do it? Let's get it done, and look at the whole thing as an integrated issue.
Many good points there. Thank you, Sarah. This siloed approach is kind of, I think echoed in lots of organisations, isn't it? And through government, we just cannot afford those silos. So really good points there. Johnny, I'd like to come to you to introduce yourself, if that's okay.
Thanks very much. So my name's Johnny Oates, and I'm, as has been said, the Lib Dem Lord spokesperson on the climate emergency and energy. I suppose why this bill is really important to me is that since I became the climate spokesperson in the Lords, I've noticed that a lot of people talk about the climate and ecological difficulties that we face as if there's something that might happen in the future if we don't do X, Y, or Z. And back in the late 1980s, I taught at a rural school in Zimbabwe, and I'm lucky enough to still be in touch with a lot of the pupils who I taught there via social media. And, to them, the climate emergency, the ecological emergency is not something that might happen in the future. It's happening now in terms of real impacts, erratic rainfall, increased drought, deteriorating soil, all that sort of stuff. So I think we have to act now. I think, just as Sarah says, the great thing about this bill is bringing the two things together. I think the ecological emergency has been sort of less prominent until relatively recently, but it's very important they're tackled together. So I very much welcome this bill and hope we can do whatever we can in order to help push it forward.
Thank you so much, Johnny. I'm really pleased to hear you bring in the impact on the Global South straight into this conversation. It's so important, and the aspect of equity, which it seems to be nowhere right now in the government's mind from personally what I can see. And last but definitely not least, I'd like to come to Jackie Hook. If you could introduce yourself and say why the bill matters to you, Jackie. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe. Thanks for organising this important event and inviting me onto the panel. My name's Jackie Hook. I'm a district and county councillor in Teignbridge district in Devon, which, for those that don't know, is between the coast at Torbay and Dartmoor, the area just south of Exeter. Teignbridge district council has been run by the Lib Dems since the elections in 2019, and I'm the executive member for climate change, a new position which we created to reflect the priority that we'd given to that topic. I was first elected in 2011, but long before that had been an environmental campaigner, set up my local cycle forum back in the 90s, my town's climate action group in 2008, and oversaw its transformation to a transition town group, of which I'm still a director. Shortly before the election in 2019, as an opposition councillor, I brought a notice of motion on this topic to the council, urging the Conservative Council to declare a climate emergency. And fortunately, with an election pending and a gallery full of local climate activists, managed to get a unanimous vote of support for that declaration, with a very ambitious carbon neutral date of 2025. And I have to say, when I heard about the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill, I immediately thought it was something that we as a council should register our support for. And what we'd admitted to do, which Sarah of course has mentioned, back in 2019, we had only made it a climate emergency declaration, and I was really keen that, you know, we had missed something out there, and the bill gave us an opportunity to raise that whole topic of the ecological and biodiversity collapse as well. Nationally, the bill takes us beyond where we are now in terms of government commitments, and it takes us to where we need to be. And importantly, as far as I'm concerned, it asks us to trust in the people of our country via a citizens' assembly, for them themselves to define the urgency of the issue as well as decide the right solutions. And with a district carbon neutral target of 2025, I'm very conscious that we as a council cannot achieve what we have resolved to do locally without government committing to more than it is currently, and not only committing but acting on those commitments. But I also feel strongly, I have to say, that we mustn't wait for government to act and use its inaction as an excuse not to act ourselves. And it will be the actions of all of us that will get us to where we need to be. So we certainly shouldn't sit back and just wait for the bill itself. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Absolutely, we need action at every level, don't we? And climate and ecology is so totally interconnected. It's somewhat an artificial separation that us humans decide that these are two separate things. As far as the planet's concerned, they're all part and parcel, aren't they? Thank you. So as we have our wonderful audience on Zoom, we have a live stream audience, and of course we have our audience watching on catch up at a later date. And we have this wonderful panel. So ahead of time, some of you submitted questions that you wanted our panel to give their views on. So we have some of those questions, and hopefully some of those questioners present with us this evening. So the first question that I'd like to come to has been submitted by John Gately. John, if you'd like to turn your camera on and join us so that you can ask your question.
Oh yeah. Sorry. Yeah, what ideas do the Lib Dems have for putting the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill kind of on the agenda in Parliament and in the media, particularly because the media haven't been really reporting on the seriousness of it, have they? So it's a difficult one, but you know, that's what my question is.
Thank you, John. A very, very important question, and a great one to start us off with. So I'd like to come to Johnny first on that one, and then I'll come on to Sarah Oatley. So yes, John.
Thanks. I mean, the first thing I should say, I think I need to be candid. As Lib Dems, we struggle with the media at the moment, partly because of the way they reflect the parliamentary strength as opposed to share of the vote. So I just want to be honest about that. But having said that, I think there are quite a number of opportunities in Parliament, and I'll talk about the Lords in particular. We're lucky in the Lords, we have greater sort of strength there than we do in the Commons at the moment. And there's also an ability in the Lords to get things on the agenda more easily than in the Commons, where it's much more carved up between Labour and the Conservative Party. So I've been looking, for example, at the Environment Bill, which is going to come from the Commons to the Lords next month at some point, and whether, I mean, we couldn't attach the whole of the bill to the Environment Bill, but what we could do probably is take sections of it and use it as an opportunity to highlight to the public the importance of the bill as a whole. So I think that's one thing we can do. I think we can use in Parliament questions. We have oral questions in the House of Lords, and obviously they do in the Commons as well. So those are opportunities, and to try and get media off the back of them. And then I think through our work as a party at local level, which obviously Jackie can talk about more, we can promote the bill and the ideas behind the bill, and also on the sort of platforms that we have at party conferences, etc. And then just finally, I think, there's an important job for us to do internally within our party when we're talking to our constituency groups, etc., to make sure that they're aware of the bill and that they're aware of the commitment of the party in Parliament and more generally to it.
Thank you, Johnny. So Olney, what would you like to add or expand on there?
I mean, Johnny has made some excellent points about what's possible in Parliament, and as he's tactfully pointed out, we have more peers than we have MPs at the moment, so there are more opportunities in the Lords, but obviously the Commons tends to get a bit more coverage. So we've got a good opportunity coming up in the Environment Bill next week, and we'll be talking about a lot of these issues, and we'll be emphasising the importance of really taking action. And the important thing is really the urgency of the action. We've got to start now. We've really got to make a difference. One of the difficulties we're currently facing in terms of getting these issues more firmly in the public domain is that obviously at the moment everyone is talking about coronavirus. Literally all my constituents seem to worry about at the moment is when are they getting their vaccine, and that's quite understandable in the current circumstances. But I think we also need to see this as an opportunity, because we know we're going to be facing a period of economic dislocation after the COVID crisis has passed, and we don't know when that will be, but fingers crossed it will be spring, early summer, that we can start to think about getting back to normal. It's like, well, how can we use the opportunity of some of the difficult policy decisions we know we're going to have to make, for example, to really start pushing the government for some of the action that we need to see. And Johnny's highlighted there's lots of different things we can be doing. We can be talking about lots of different policy asks in lots of different ways. So when we're doing oral questions or written questions, I think the thing with the bill is it's that sort of really kind of high level. This is the big change we need to see. And every day in lots of different ways that we can be talking about some of the little changes that that go towards making those big changes. But yes, it's also about using the strength of cross-party institutions. So, for example, I sit on the Public Accounts Committee, and next week we'll be looking at the recent National Audit Office report, the government's road to net zero. And that report really lays out the things I said at the top of the session about, it's all very spread out, and it's all, different parts of government. And so, we can keep pushing for, some real, a much more integrated, joined up. If the government are serious about net zero, they need to demonstrate they're serious. So yes, we can start using the platform. The platforms we have in social media, the platform we have in more mainstream media to try and really push those sorts of things. I think one of the things that's really important for MPs is we're all faced every day with some of these kind of these challenges from constituents. We represent all of our constituents, and they have very different views amongst them. And it's really important to stick clearly to the principles. So I have a lot of car drivers in my constituency, and they complain about congestion and they complain about traffic. I don't want to lose their votes, but at the same time, I'm very clear that our environment can only be improved if people make fewer car journeys. And so I try and emphasize that when people come to me with these issues. That does present a challenge for constituency MPs, because you're often going against people's preferences. You're challenging their own preferences. But it's important that we do that as much as we possibly can. That's kind of outside Parliament in a way, but just to make sure that we're always taking that message to our constituents, use our role as community leaders to really, show people the changes they can make in their everyday lives that can actually, start to build up to, a really kind of transformational impact.
Thank you for that, Sarah. I wanted to give John the opportunity to come back on, actually, as the person that came up with the question, and as time allows. I can see, John, that you've put a sort of reflectional question in the chat. Do you want to come back on and just respond yourself in person to what you've heard Johnny and Sarah say?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's in Parliament. It's you know, it's a process, isn't it? I understand that, but the media are unbelievable in terms of the news media in this country and how badly they're regulated and what they should be reporting on and how they should be reporting is a massive issue in itself. In order to get it on the agenda, what ideas have you got about getting around that? You know, I suppose if you do confront a lot of these media organisations, including, you know, Murdoch's companies, then you risk being, I don't know, smeared. So, you know, it's a proper dilemma, really, isn't it? I just wondered if you got any ideas about or any reflections on that particular problem.
Lovely.
So, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Johnny, can I come to you on that? Any further reflections?
Yeah, I mean, just specifically on the question of the media, I think this is a real problem. I remember a couple of years ago, I saw, I think it was page 4 of the Times, that they had a reasonable sized piece, but it was about the assessment of the progress towards the Paris targets and basically warning of disaster. And what really struck me at the time was, if you actually believe what you printed, this should be on the front page today and every day. But the problem is there isn't generally that interest. We did try and regulate the press during the coalition government, but the Conservative government never actually enacted the clause of the Act that we brought in. And, you know, we know very much that when you clash with the interests of powerful people, they react quite fearsomely. But I'm afraid you just have to do it. And one of the interesting things we found in government was, I think we were about the only party that ever probably been in government that didn't owe any favours to the media, because they just ignored us. But they have a pretty brutal way of dealing with that, to be honest. So it is a real problem. We just need to, keep bashing about it. And I think, some of the things that have happened over the recent years, the public mobilization around this has forced the media, and particularly the print media, to actually sit up and listen. So I think, there are things we can do in Parliament, but, that groundswell of support mobilized on the ground is what really pressurizes them.
Yeah, if I could just sort of back up, I suppose, what Johnny was saying there. I mean, in a sense, the media have the same issue that MPs have, that you have to be responding to the public, to what the public's concerns and interests are. But the media don't have the same kind of, I guess, responsibility for being role models. So, the climate change, I think, so far has always seemed like a problem. I think Johnny referred to it earlier, or maybe Sarah in her opening remarks, always seems like a problem for the future or somebody else's problem. And it doesn't impact yet people's daily lives. Now, the whole point of wanting to take action now is because we don't want it to get to the point where it's affecting people's daily lives, because that impact would be severe. Someone in the chat is mentioning they've got floods in their area at the moment. And that's an example of how climate change is having an impact on people's daily lives, like literally right now. But it's difficult to join the dots. It feels like the flooding is happening, that's something we can't control, but the local council should have done more about flood defences or something like that. It always feels like there's a different reason for the problem. I think we're making progress, for what it's worth. I think there is much better coverage of the climate emergency than there was. I think people have a much greater understanding of the nearness, if you like, of the emergency, and a much greater awareness of their own responsibilities, or their own actions that they can take to really make a difference. So I share frustration about how all kinds of topics are covered in the media, and certainly when you're sort of on the inside in Parliament and you're experiencing some of those events in real life, and then you read them in the newspaper afterwards, you're like, that is not what I saw. So, you know, there is a real problem with bias and selection of stories, I would say, is the bigger issue, the things that the media want to report on. But I would say I do think the picture is improving. And one of the things that's being helpful, and which I think is a real strength, is that climate action against climate change is not at the moment a massively party political issue. There is a broad degree of consensus across the major parties that action needs to be taken. It's a quibble about what action and when and how much we're going to spend and how we're going to prioritise. But the fact of climate change, we've overcome, I think, that barrier by and large in the last 5 years. Unless somebody has got, you know, an example they want to quote me, I don't see a mainstream platform for climate change denial anymore. So I think that in itself is an example of how far we've come. So as I say, it's an improving picture, but I do share John's frustrations on this.
Indeed, thank you, Sarah. I do tell me I'm living in an area where we've got significant flooding at the moment. We've got local rivers with the highest levels ever recorded. Over 100 households in the area that I live in had knocks on the doors from the Environment Agency last night telling them they might have to get out and evacuate. You know, it's real and it is here now. As a constituent and a voter and a mum, I would love my member of Parliament to be speaking up and telling the truth. Alas, I don't hear it. It's very saddening and very frustrating. Thank you, John, for your first question. Let's come on to the second question this evening, which is from Jay Dunia. I don't know if Jay's here to ask the question. If not, I'll ask it. I think not.
No,
Oh, you are, Jay. Oh, wonderful. Okay.
I can try and start my video up. It's not letting me.
Okay. Well, if you're happy to just ask it with audio, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah. Well, just to give a bit of context in relation to the last question, we're Stratford-upon-Avon Extinction Rebellion, and we have actually been publicly supporting the CEE Bill since its inception in September by lobbying our MP Nadhim Zahawi weekly, or initially for 8 days and then weekly with a poster campaign that we then actually publish on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And so do like us and spread the campaign for us. And then, as I say, each Saturday, we go down and do this vigil, and we now included our district council. But the question I have reflects where we are at the moment after 28 days of doing this campaign, which is how do we get our district and county council, as well as other climate activists, to acknowledge the CEE Bill? They're not even acknowledging it at the moment.
Okay, super question, Jay, and thank you for all the work you've been doing. If you've got any links to your Facebook or other things you'd like to share with folk in the chat, I'm sure people will be interested to see it, so please do that. And Jackie, I'll come to you first on this one. This seems a question made for you. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Zoe. I was just going to refer back to the previous conversation. I think all these questions are linked. You know, I meet many people in my position as a councillor who won't recognise the role that Extinction Rebellion have had in bringing this issue to the top of the agenda again, because I was involved 10, 12 years ago, when it was a really big issue. For some reason, it collectively went off our agenda. And I mean that even amongst people that cared about it, and that included me. It wasn't something we talked about as much as we did. And why has it come back at the top of our agenda? Because autumn 2018, Extinction Rebellion started their work. We wouldn't have the term climate emergency if it wasn't for them. And you know, that's been instrumental in getting where we have. So I don't want to downplay the importance that they've had in this. The question I suppose now is, what sort of action do we need now? Do we still need that sort of action? Or, you know, it is on our collective agenda now. Everybody's talking about it. There is a consensus. But how do we get those declarations into action? How do we get people implementing what they need to do and acting on them? That's the problem. At our district council, as I said, we took a notice of motion to our council, and that's something that you could encourage your council to do. You may want to do it as a first action, or you may want to do it because your MP, you've already contacted your MP and they haven't been supportive. But a notice of motion is something that has to be brought forward by a councillor. So you'll need to find your local councillor, contact them, or a councillor that you feel will be supportive of the issue. And they'll usually need to get the support of about 5 other councillors in order to take it to a council meeting. And there's several things you can do to get publicity around that. So, you know, obviously you want to publicise that they are taking it to a meeting, get it in the press, get it out on social media. And once it is on the council agenda, then a couple of days before, write to your councillors, nice short bullet point type emails explaining why they should support it. And then as many people as possible. So your councillor is a busy person, they won't be able to read them all, but the volume of the emails will indicate the level of support for it. In days gone by, in a different world, I'd have suggested that you all need to turn up on the day en masse and ensure that you've booked yourself into the council chamber. There's usually a bit of a booking process you need to go through. You wouldn't be able to join in the debate, but you would just listen. But of course, now most council meetings are virtual, but even so, you can publicly view a council meeting and you can urge your supporters to watch virtually and let the councillors know that you will be watching the debate. And hopefully, if you've lobbied well beforehand, set out clear arguments supporting the bill, you will be successful and get the unanimous vote of support, as we did. But in order to get this, it's probably worthwhile for those councillors that are on the edge, not quite sure that they are supportive, to talk about all those co-benefits of climate and the ecological emergency makes sense. So solving air pollution, fuel poverty, helping wildlife, talk about all those other things as well to get those people on the edge over to your side. I was going to mention, if there's a slot for public questions at the meeting, and this goes for any council meeting, there's usually a slot for public questions. Keep getting your questions in there. You need to book them in 3 days in advance, and you'll get a standard answer and a chance for another question back. Now, those council meetings, depending what's on the agenda, are often watched by quite a lot of people these days when they're virtual. You can get that topic raised over and over again. Don't just do it once, keep doing it. As politicians, we're told you have to mention something 7 times to people before they start taking notice of it. So, and keep it short, 3 points that you're asking, etc. All that normal sort of advice. And after the day, ensure you publicise the result and use it as a platform to continue in the discussion. And ensure the council does write to the MPs if that's what they've promised to do, and continue lobbying or congratulate them depending what the result was. And then don't stop, because obviously you've probably built some good relationships with some of the councillors as a result of your lobbying. And remember, councillors are short of time, even those that are committed, totally committed to the topic, they're short of time. So offer your help, offer, how can you help? How can I help you take this forward? Build alliances is the way that we're going to crack this one. Thank you.
Wow, absolute smorgasbord of options there, Jay. Fabulous advice from Jackie. Sarah Olney, in a minute or two, is there anything you'd like to add to sort of augment what Jackie's described there?
I think the really important thing for any political representative at whatever level is to be hearing from their constituents. Right now, we're really limited at how much proactive canvassing we can do. Obviously, we can't go door to door like we would be doing in normal times. So it's really important that people hear from you. I find it quite frustrating how often I sort of read on social media or Twitter or something like that, oh, well, no one's doing anything about X issue. And I'm like, literally no one has contacted me about that. I didn't know it was an issue. We're not all seeing. We need people to come forward and tell us what's on their mind, what they're bothered about, what they want to see more action from us on. And it is surprising how passive people can be. They expect the world to be changed for them. But they haven't even bothered to tell their local representatives, whether it's their local council or their MP, that this is the thing they want to see action on. So I just want to reiterate that, and I'm not even preaching to the converted here. Nobody, I'm sure, on this live stream needed to be told that, but it is surprising how little engagement sometimes you can get from people on issues that are really, really important. And then the trouble is, of course, you get diverted onto the issues that the people who are shouting about. And I'm afraid in my constituency, I get a lot of traffic and parking issues, which is not what I came into politics for, if I'm going to be completely honest. And that takes up your time, and people expect a response and they want to see action. And of course, as a local representative, you do need to respond. So it's really, really important that people understand, people, make a noise and that they make a fuss and that they do that. I was just seeing in the chat someone talking about the Tory MPs in the New Forest. And if I say I know them both well, I don't mean that I know them personally, but I know the two people that they're talking about. And the Conservatives not engaging with this. And I think what's important in that kind of situation is still to keep talking about it and get your friends and organise via pressure groups if it's Extinction Rebellion or Friends of the Earth or whatever, and to keep the pressure up, and to get your to build your own groups and to have those people pressurising your MPs. And I think it's noticeable a lot of the newer Tory MPs are much more engaged with climate issues than those two particular gentlemen who I think have been in place for quite a long time. And then the more MPs we have across the House who are really, from whatever party, who are really engaged in this issue and are really trying, the more people we have, if you like, in the centre who are saying, no, this is really a big problem and this is really something we have to deal with, the better. So whether it's locally, making a big fuss, or whether it's, you've managed to get the attention of enough MPs that they start to make a big fuss, that is still, it's kind of like that. It's that old-fashioned way, but it is still how it works. Get people's attention, and it's numbers that really make a difference, and persistence.
Numbers and persistence, yes. Thank you, Sarah. Two messages loud and clear. I know Sarah Lunnon wanted to just come in briefly on this as well.
I think mostly it's all been covered, but it is the persistence. And just because you haven't got the response you want, don't go away. Keep going, because it looks like a solid wall until it suddenly falls over. So don't give up. Persistence, regularity, and use Twitter. Really use Twitter. Retweet. Get some people to not quite a Twitter storm, but tweet it, and tweet your local newspaper or your local BBC station about what kind of response you're getting.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Loads of good ideas there, and there's stuff in the chat. People are saying, can this all be added on the CEE Bill website? And yeah, I mean, there's some ideas that they're really excellent here. And I'm going to just 30 seconds of chair's privilege to give a shout out to Warrington Borough Council for being one of the first to unanimously support a motion in support of the bill. So thank you, my Borough Council, and thank you to the local Lib Dems who championed that. And never forget that relationships and trust are so important. If you know local people and you've worked with them, it just makes such a difference. So thank you very much indeed to my local colleagues for supporting passing a motion unanimously. Very grateful, all three parties. Right, time for our third pre-submitted question. Tony Waterson, are you here to submit to speak? Oh, great. Over to you, Tony, to ask your question.
Hi, thanks a lot. Yes, I'm also in Extinction Rebellion in Newcastle, and this is about the Labour Party. My Labour MP is Nick Brown, the Labour Chief Whip. I know that quite a number of Labour MPs have supported the bill, but I've had really quite a negative response from him. He's been a very strong supporter of climate action really for some years, and he goes on at great length in this letter. I've written to him several times about his commitment to this and what all the good things the Labour Party is doing, but he more or less dismisses the bill in two sentences. He says, as you'll be aware, the CEE Bill is a presentation bill which is designed to draw attention to major issues and map out a legislative pathway. Therefore, it will not be voted on in the Commons. But I do certainly support the aims and intentions of the bill, which is not strong enough to put him down as a supporter. So really, what line should be taken? And is this a general line the Labour Party is taking, or some parts of the Labour Party? And how can we work on him as somebody who really ought to be supporting this to get him behind it?
Super question, thank you, Tony. I'll come to Johnny first and then to Sarah Olney.
Well, actually, I've known Nick quite well because I worked on a bill many years ago, which was about setting a target for the percentage of gross national income we spent on overseas development. So I will have a word with him. I can't really see the logic, to be honest. If he supports the bill and what it stands for, then why doesn't he just support it? That doesn't make any sense. And of course, it is perfectly true that getting the bill as a presentation bill in its current form through Parliament in face of the resistance of the Conservative Party with a majority of 80 is a pretty hard prospect to achieve, first off. Well, it's not possible with a presentation bill, but that's actually not the point. The point is that this brings together, as Sarah said at the outset and others have mentioned, these key issues in a holistic way. Is an opportunity really to project how important this is, and as initial bills that are introduced into Parliament, the first bills to abolish slavery got a derisory thing. You've got to keep at this. Persistence and numbers, which I think was Sarah's phrase earlier, is absolutely the thing. So Nick can add to the numbers, tell him to get behind it, get his name on it. I will when I next see him. But we need to do that with all of these things, all of these MPs, and keep chipping away. And the one thing I would kind of suggest is that rather than attacking MPs for not signing it, we just keep putting pressure on them to sign it so that they don't react against it. Final thing, just to say and reflect a bit what Jackie said, I think the role that Extinction Rebellion played in putting this matter on the agenda was massively important, because I think it mobilized people and it made people pay attention. What we've got to do now is check that there are other people contacting, Sarah, and well, not so much Sarah because she's obviously signed up, but other MPs, checking this really is on the agenda, and thinking about, groups, whilst they may not listen to the Tories to sort of Extinction Rebellion supporters so much, get some groups that they do listen to, whether that's, church groups or elderly groups, or, if they think their electoral interests are going to be compromised by not supporting this, then they'll start acting. So I think that should be the focus.
Thank you, Johnny. I'll come to Sarah Olney in a sec. I think you also inadvertently highlighted a whole other route. All Lib Dem MPs and members of the House of Lords to contact their mates in other parties to get them to support the bill. Thank you for that. I think the bill team will probably clock that. Bless you. Sarah Olney, anything you'd like to add to what Johnny's outlined?
I don't know Nick Brown as well as Johnny does, but what I do know about Nick is he's the Labour Chief Whip, and so I'm not surprised to hear he's being ultra cautious. So as Chief Whip, there'll be two things that Nick knows inside out. The first one is parliamentary procedure, and the second is Labour Party policy. So where I imagine he's coming from is firstly that as Chief Whip, if he were to support something, it would be sending a very strong signal to everybody else in the party that they should be supporting it as well. But I imagine, in a sense, that while that would be a great thing for the bill overall, from Nick's point of view, and I am guessing here, I obviously haven't discussed this with him, he would be very anxious not to support something that he didn't see as necessarily being aligned to Labour Party policy. And I think Labour as well, they can be a little bit tribal, to put it mildly. They would want everything to be, they want opposition basically to come from the Labour Party. So the fact that this bill has been put forward by Caroline Lucas, they would very much want to be doing their own thing. So Nick Brown in particular, as I say, being the Chief Whip, he would be feeling, I think he'd feel anxious about putting his name to something that wasn't a Labour bill. So I think, and I'm just having a look through the chat there, and I can see people are getting quite lukewarm responses from Labour MPs, and maybe the challenge back to them is like, well, if you're not supporting this, tell me what you are doing. And you know, and I think as well, really emphasising the value of, you know, a united opposition on this. As I said earlier, there's a lot of political consensus on climate change, and maybe we as opposition parties need to put our heads together a little bit more and say, well, actually, is this an area where we can cooperate a little bit more? There are lots of reasons why we don't necessarily want to work together on other issues, but climate change is something where we can actually make a difference collectively and really start to put the pressure on. Certainly, I think SNP, Lib Dems, Greens, Plaid, everybody else, you know, we collaborate on a lot of things. There are distinctive points of difference between the major opposition parties, but we can collaborate on things. And so I don't see why, if individual Labour MPs are happy to support this, that they couldn't make a decision as a party that actually it aligns with their policy, and that they want to be part of a collective opposition effort. I think it's worth challenging when you get that kind of response from Labour MPs. Other Labour MPs have supported it. Why would you, you know, not want, you know, to be part of this big coalition, you know, of opposition MPs to who, you know, and the more people that support it, the more pressure can be applied.
Thank you, Sarah. And you know, when I noticed in myself when you said about there is a consensus, and why can't, you know, opposition parties could come together to have that cross-party consensus, etc., and build that. It's just like I think there's so much desire for that in the country, particularly amongst young people. You know, my daughter turns 18 on the day she can vote, you know, on the election day this year, and she's desperate to start voting and start having her voice heard. And
excellent.
I think
that's really good.
It is. It's wonderful, and I think young people especially just want to get beyond party politics and want people who represent them to actually do the right thing. I think there's a massive desire for that. So yeah, wholeheartedly, yes. Just thank you for that. Yes.
Sorry, I just want to do a little bit of history here and say that the 2008 Climate Change Act, which was at the time the most radical piece of legislation around climate, started its life in 2005 as a presentation bill. And the reason why it got picked up by government was because over 400 MPs signed an early day motion, and people like the WI and various other like groups like that all came together with a huge public campaign requesting that their MPs support it. So the fact is, presentation bills do become acts of parliament. So I think it's worth, when you're writing to your Labour MPs and people like that, reminding them of that. Yeah, so they can change the law.
Super point. Thank you, Sarah. Absolutely. And thank you for the great question, Tony. We're going to come on to the fourth of our four pre-submitted questions. And David Eager, are you able to ask your question? If you're available to put your camera on and your audio on. David Eager, are you able to ask your question? If not, I'll ask it on your behalf. Not seeing any sign of David at the moment, so I'll go ahead and ask it. And David, if you do make yourself known in the chat, and you can come back in at during the conversation if you like. I don't want to cut you out, of course. Okay, so David submitted this question, which is a great question. And just to give all the panelists a heads up, I'm going to ask you for a couple of minutes each on this, because actually it's a real cross, you know, it's across everyone. This great question. So David asked, during the coronavirus lockdown periods, how might more people be helped to think more about nature and climate and actively prepare themselves for campaigning on these issues? I think it's a really super question. And Jackie, if I could come to you first, I know you haven't had much warning of thinking about that, but if I come to you first for your individual thoughts for a couple of minutes, that would be great.
Yep, okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, you know, we're on it now. We've got 200 plus people, I think, across the whole country, talking to each other and sharing information and knowledge virtually. And that's one thing the pandemic has enabled us to do. And, you know, there are so many webinars out there now. I've never attended so many webinars and learned so much about topics that I probably would have been sat in a traffic jam. Sorry, I come from a rural area, so I have to drive sometimes. You know, now I'm spending my time sat webinars learning things. So we can all do that, and we can push that knowledge and share those opportunities to learn, and also maybe organise your own local discussions around topics that are virtual. It seems such an amazing opportunity to do that, and use social media to, you know, go into the edges of where people's interests are. So just one example, we have a local Facebook page that celebrates.
Oh, you're mute, Jackie.
Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes,
they post pictures of local trees that are important to them. But what that's done is start conversations about the importance of trees, and started some really good conversations from people that are probably on the edge of the climate change issue. So they're, you know, it's not always scary facts and threatening information that are going to get people involved. It might be something that will engage them, wildlife, whatever it might be. And those conversations are going to bring more and more people in. And we now have the opportunity to do those virtually and over social media. There was just a comment on the chat I noticed asking what it was that councils were being asked to do and how they did it. So it was the notice of motion I was talking about, and that's what you can ask a council to do. And you can do that now virtually in lockdown. All of it's done virtually. So that's something you can spend some time doing, get that onto your council agenda, and do that sort of lobbying to get those conversations started and engage with the press and through social media. I think Johnny made this point. Be positive, encourage and engage with your councillors positively, because that is the way you'll get their engagement. You won't get it by writing threatening or abusive letters, and hopefully nobody here would do that. And I was on a webinar early today that somebody, a member of the public, said, oh, what you want to do if your council's declared and you find them not doing enough action is to take them to the Ombudsman. And I thought, no, that wouldn't work. If your council has declared and isn't doing enough as far as you're concerned, which is probably quite likely, then find out why they're not doing enough, offer some help, see where the hurdles and problems are that are stopping. You know, maybe the councillors don't quite know what to do next. They're just ordinary citizens, essentially. They need a helping hand, but you know, taking them to the Ombudsman is not going to get you where you want to be, or where we want to collectively be.
Thanks, Jackie. Thank you. Sarah Olney, can I come to you next on that question about how you think we can help people to engage in nature and climate and prepare themselves to campaign on these issues?
I think one of the interesting, one of the things I hope might happen as a result of coronavirus is people have an awareness of how their individual actions impact everybody else. Now we've had that obviously as a really, you know, it's really been brought home to us. You know, the reason we're all sitting at home right now and doing this over Zoom is because we all have to stay home so that we can reduce the risk of the virus spreading. And so my action in staying home is keeping everybody else safe. It's not about, you know, keeping myself safe or trying to keep myself from catching the virus. It's to stop my impact on everybody else. And I think some people have been quite slow to catch up with that. They're kind of like, oh, I can take the risk for myself, it's fine. But gradually, I think we've become more and more aware that the point of limiting contact is to keep everybody safe, and that we have an individual role. You know, our individual role has an impact on the whole community. And I really think that that's quite an interesting philosophy that we might be able to sort of bring forward into when we think about climate. You know, it's kind of like your choice to, you know, make that journey a car journey rather than walking or cycling. It's not, you know, it's obviously easier for you, but it has an impact on everybody else. And I think the other thing possibly about coronavirus that some people will have found is that they've become much more in touch with the people who live next door and in the same street as them. You know, I've got a street WhatsApp group that I didn't have before and things like this. And that means that we can firstly, we can connect a little bit more with our communities, as Jackie was just saying, but also we can just have conversations with people who live in the area. And they, you know, and I think because we've become quite, you know, stovepiped, our social media circles tend to very much agree with us, you know, but actually just having a conversation with somebody next door, you have in common the fact that you live in the same street, but, you know, other than that, you might have very, very different views. And I think that will really help to shape some local campaigning. It's kind of like, once you can work out in a, what is it that you all have in common about what would you all like to change about your nearby environment? You know, that can really sort of start to help that local campaigning. And I think what I'm trying to say about that is your view is not shaped by what you're reading on Twitter or Facebook, but by the actual experiences of people who are living near to you. And you can all agree perhaps what you would like to see happen next in your local community. And then you can start to take that forward while we've all been sort of, commuting to our work and not paying too much attention to what's been going on around us. You know, and you know, getting on news from fairly filtered sources, as it were. You know, we think we have an idea of what's going on, but it's only now that we've actually been forced to stay home. We're forced to think about how our behaviour impacts others, and perhaps we're starting to talk to the people in our community a little bit more. Well, I think that can be the impetus for change, and start to say, well, actually, there are too many cars, they drive too fast, or, you know, we're not doing enough to protect our local green spaces that we're all spending more time in now. You know, what can we do to change that? And I think it will, if we can start to identify those small acts or those small things that can change in our local environment, and start to chat to our neighbours about whether they would join with us in taking action to help that happen. I believe those are the kinds of opportunities that this horrible period that we're all, you know, struggling so much with, but those are the kind of positive actions that we can possibly take forward.
Thank you, Sarah. Johnny, what's your take on this, or what would you add that's different from what's been said already?
Well, I agree with everything that's been said so far. So just briefly, I think this is actually a particularly good time because, first of all, as Sarah says, I think there is a bit of awareness, and not just about how our individual actions can affect situations sort of more globally, but also how fragile things are, and that there are things that are beyond our control. And, you know, if we really get into the sort of feedback loop that we are in danger of getting into on climate, where we will not be able to turn the clock back, you know, the coronavirus will look like a very mild thing compared with that. And I think, you know, getting that out there is important. I think there would be some receptiveness to that. The second thing on a more local level is, I think that a lot of people, as a result of the lockdowns, have got a lot more in touch with nature in their local areas. And certainly I've, you know much more about the local chalk stream near us, all the ecology and wildlife there, how precious it is, and how vulnerable it is. So I think there's an opportunity because, from, you know, the number of people you see walking now, because it's about the only thing you can do, it's great. It's opened that up. And I think, you know, working through sort of local nature groups and ecology groups and all that sort of thing is an important aspect as well.
Thank you, Johnny. Appreciate that. I'm really noticing that you're bringing the urgency back into the conversation, which is so crucial. It's so crucial. Sarah, Lunnon, anything you wanted to add to this question before we move on to other questions coming in from our audience?
I think the point I would like to make that hasn't been made yet, and it's kind of extending the scope of this question, I think, is that COVID and the crisis of the pandemic was known about. It was recognised. It was at the top of the cabinet risk register ever since the risk register was devised, and yet we did not take adequate preparations to reduce the threat. That it's been a threat multiplier, and it's impacted most on those people least able to deal with its impacts, and that's going to be the same. That is going to happen with climate, as Johnny said earlier. But the main point, I think, is that the COVID crisis and COVID is a symptom of ecological breakdown. So it's a zoonotic disease, and we are going to see more and more of these. And we've had MERS, we had SARS, then we have COVID, and there are going to be more pandemics. So The point in time when we had the luxury of dealing with single crises have now gone, and we're now dealing with a pandemic and a flood crisis. So this is only going to get worse, and the pressure's going to screw on. So that's, yeah, that's.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right, Sarah. I completely agree. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I was thinking of the exact same point about the link that I, as a citizen, as a concerned parent, and a bit of a science geek, and all that, I don't hear anything like enough of a link being made between COVID and zoonotic diseases and destruction of nature and the climate and ecological emergency and politics and policy, and there's not enough link being made. And I personally,
can I
I'd
quickly
love
come in
politicians
on
to do
that?
that. Feel free.
Yes, I just wanted to quickly come in on that. I think one of the reasons is that everyone has a vested interest in COVID being a solvable problem that we can get over and done with by the spring. Or it was going to be by Christmas, but now it's by the spring. It was originally going to be only 12 weeks, but this is a temporary blip, and normal service will be restored. And I think that's very much what the government would like. And to be fair, I think they've got a vast number of the public with them on that. And which of us doesn't want to get back to those things that made our lives worth living? We're now missing so very much, even if it's just seeing our family and friends again. So there is a very strong vested interest, and I say, definitely with the government, but they are reflecting, I think, the public to a large degree, that this is a solvable problem. We've got our vaccines. We just need to get everybody jabbed, and then we can pick up where we left off, and everything will go back exactly the way it was. And that is why I think there is a reluctance to set the current crisis into the context of actually, there is serious ecological and climate change going on. This is a symptom of it, and radical change needs to happen. And it's a tough message, and it's not in the government's interests at the moment to really be pushing that message. Although I think they could do more than they are. I think they are. They are being a bit naive in trying to kind of pretend that everything is just going to go exactly the way it was before, and no long-term changes are necessary. And I think there are more enlightened views out there that are like, no, we are going to need to make some major adjustments, even if it was just about resisting the threat of future pandemics, as Sarah's highlighted. I think we're all kind of aware that that's going to be the case. What does that look like? On one level, how does the Cabinet Office risk register need to be updated? But but it is about looking at some of these bigger changes that we are actually going to need to make.
Yes, absolutely. And I noticed someone's put in the chat, we can't develop a vaccine for the climate and ecological emergency. And Bill, you're absolutely right. We can't, alas. Although we do know lots of solutions, they're just not happening, and they haven't been happening for decades. And I guess me sitting here, I'm just feeling that the government is, what you're describing is the risk is the government's treating us like children. We need to be treated like adults and told the truth, because until we're told the truth, we can't respond as citizens appropriately. And we're on the edge of it being too late, aren't we? And we need the truth, otherwise we can't act. Okay, we've got some, thank you to all our questions submitted. We've got questions flying in from the audience, flying in from people enthusiastic to ask lots of questions. I know to our panel, thank you. You've been keeping an eye on the chat as well, which is wonderful. Colleagues behind the scenes have been sending me some questions that I'd like to put to our panel, and I'm sure more will emerge. So Sarah Olney, whilst you're here, I'll put this next one to you if that's okay, which is, I've been asked by a member of our audience saying, will the Lib Dems adopt the CEE Bill in party policy?
We have quite established processes for adopting party policy, and we did a big climate emergency policy, not at our last autumn conference, but the one before. So it's the way we develop party policy in the Lib Dems is we will have a task force to develop policy, and then it gets voted on at conference. It has to be decided by conference, and we have one member, one vote. So there are something like 100,000 Lib Dem members, and we have obviously, in the face of COVID, had to have digital conferences. It always used to be we would get together in some huge room in Bournemouth or York or somewhere like that, and then we would put motions to conference and then we would vote on them. But now that we've got digital conference, it's presenting quite an interesting new development for our policy making, because so many more people can get involved from their, the comfort of their own homes. They don't have to travel and pay vastly inflated prices for Brighton hotel rooms. So it's really increasing participation. So I think it'll be interesting to see what impact that change has on our policy making process. So the reason I've gone into that long preamble is it's very much not for me to say. When I'm the spokesperson, I'm very much like the mouthpiece. I have a role in shaping policy and trying to decide priorities and thinking about what we highlight and what we might bring to Parliament. But policy itself is decided by members, and that's the way it is in the Lib Dems. And of course I can influence, but I think what you'll find, instead of the CEE bill in party policy, you will find elements of it across our whole policy portfolio. I believe that the Liberal Democrats have got, of the major parties, the most ambitious policy on climate change, it's there on our website for anybody who wants to go and have a look. And certainly where we're in government, and Jackie is an excellent example of this, we're doing everything we can to put at least the principles of the CEE bill into practice. Where I am here in Richmond Park, I have 2 local authorities, Kingston and Richmond, both Lib Dem led, and we have made loads of progress on so many of these issues since we took over in 2018. So I hope nobody thinks that that's me giving a typically evasive politician's answer, because the answer is it's not up to me. And there's about 100 and something thousand people who determine Lib Dem policy rather than just me. But we have done a great deal on climate policy in recent years, and we're continuing to do so. And it's something we are adding to and refining at almost every conference, which happens twice a year. So I think we're already quite ambitious, but we will certainly look to extend what we already have.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate your answer, and of course we appreciate the support for the bill, and at the same time I'm sure you'll understand local people's and campaigners' frustration at the pace of change that so Angela's put in the chat, it's 2 to 3 years is a long wait in an emergency. We haven't got time, and we need this to speed up. But thank you. Next question, let's put to Jackie. She's come in from a member of our audience. Jackie, this is saying, what would you like local environmental groups to do to support the progress of the CEE bill?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Would you like me to repeat the question, Jackie?
No, I could hear you, but
okay.
I was on mute, so I wondered whether people could hear me. Okay, no, there's a lot you can do. In our local area, climate action groups have actually come together under an umbrella group called Action on Climate in Teignbridge. So they're a sort of trusted body under which all climate action groups and parish and town councils have come together, which provides one point of contact for us as a council, which has been really, really useful. And we actually have a very close relationship with them, where we actually use the expertise. I mean, what councils have not got is lots of money at the moment. In fact, most councils have got a big black hole. And what we haven't got is lots of staff. And although we are fortunate enough to have appointed a climate change officer, but we know we've got lots of experts out in the community. You are experts. And councils ought to be using the expertise in our communities much more, and that's what we've been able to be done through this Action on Climate in Teignbridge group. So that's one thing you could do. If you're a diverse range of groups, get yourselves together under one umbrella, go and approach your council as a body, and what can you offer the council to achieve their objectives, hopefully, if they are their objectives. You just need to remember that all politicians ultimately need to get elected. And so what about proving, they're going to respond when they see a majority of the public supporting an issue, they're going to respond. So you could go out and prove to the council by surveys or other means, local surveys, how many of the local residents in their area support this issue. So, you know, do some surveys and present those to the council. That's a couple of ideas anyway.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Jackie. Anything else you'd like to add before we move to the next question?
I'd like to lead on from what Jackie said about coming together as an alliance is a great plan, but also pulling other people into those alliances with the environmental groups. So go and talk to your churches, go and talk to the local WI, so that your alliance is not just what can enables you to be brushed off as the usual suspects, but go and get some of those other people in as well, so that it's not so easy to just say, oh well, you would say that anyway. So try and broaden your alliance out, and then just keep turning up. Again, it is the persistence and the nature of the persistence, and be pleasant but keep engaging, and it's that relentlessness which will prove positive in the end.
Thank you, Sarah. I think that's a really helpful addition, and I think I'm getting 3 keywords really sticking out for this: is persistence, alliances, and numbers. 3 words. Okay, I'm going to come to another question that's been submitted. This time from Julie, who's watching us on Facebook. Thank you for watching this on Facebook Live, Julie. So I think this question probably is to Johnny, Sarah Olney, and possibly Sarah Lunnon, whichever of you feels like you want to answer this first and then come in. So the question is, how many signed up MPs are needed to get this debated in March? And if it's not debated, what happens next? Who'd like to go for that one?
It's not going to be debated because the Friday hearings have just been suspended. That might be what Sarah Olney is about to say as well. So it's not going to be debated, but I think there is still the opportunity in March, to highlight that those debates have been halted, and the lack of ability for civil society to influence legislation. That it shouldn't just be a once every 5-year event, and there should be roots in for civil society to impact on what Parliament's doing.
Just to add, the one thing that has just been restored in the Lords is debates for backbenchers. Now, I unfortunately can't, as I'm not a backbencher, I'm not allowed to submit for those, but it might be possible. I mean, obviously it's not nearly as good as getting a debate in the Commons, but it might be possible to get a debate in the Lords, which could be used to get some profile. So I mean, I'd be happy to explore that with some backbench colleagues in the Lords, and I'm sure you'd get a great deal of cross-party support on that.
Oh, that's fabulous, Johnny. Thank you. That's really excellent. Sarah Olney, is there anything else you wanted to add there?
Just to say, I'm a relatively new MP, so I am not totally au fait with all parliamentary procedure yet, but I don't think there needs to be a certain number of MPs supporting it before it gets debated. I think it will be scheduled anyway, but what you might find is that, although Sarah Lunnon is correct that we have just suspended them because we can't have MPs travelling to Parliament at the moment. So that's a bit unfortunate, but they will be back at some point. But what you will find is that a lot will be scheduled on the same day, and depending on how many are scheduled before, you will, the first 2 or 3 might get a debate, and then the next, if anything else is then scheduled for debate, we move to another day. So that's my understanding of how it works. So it's not straightforward, I'm afraid. But as far as I know, you don't have to have a maximum number or a minimum number of MPs supporting it before it gets debated.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Appreciate that. So we've got some more questions coming in, both in the chat and behind the scenes. Another one I'd like to put, I think both to Sarah Olney and to Johnny, is can the MPs, and I would add, can the MPs and the peers who back the bill get together and agree a tactic in Parliament to work together? Great question.
Probably the best way to do that, if it's not already been done, and I'm going to look to Sarah Lunnon for this, is to set up what's called an all-party parliamentary group. And the most effective ones are where they're supported by outside organisations acting as secretariats, because if there is extra resource to support them, then they can be more effective. But the all-party parliamentary group is the sort of established forum for MPs from different parties to work together. And there's some fantastic groups, two that I know of well because Lib Dem colleagues are involved in them. We have an APPG for coronavirus at the moment, and it's producing some fantastic research, and it had a great debate earlier this week or last week, I think, on the effects of long COVID and how the government might seek to support people who are suffering from long COVID. So that came out of cross-party work. And my colleague Jamie Stone has set up the APPG for the excluded. So some of you might know there's quite a lot of people in the sort of self-employed sector and other sectors who can't claim universal credit and can't get furloughed and so on and so forth, and really are, existing without any financial support throughout the pandemic. And so Jamie Stone has set up a really successful APPG, and hundreds of MPs from right across the House have joined that one to lobby the government for more action for that particular group. So that's just an example of what APPGs can achieve. So I think that would probably be the best approach. And as I say, the most successful ones tend to get support from third party, from non-parliamentary groups who act as what's called a secretariat, and they will contact all the MPs, take the minutes, set out, find speakers and so on and so forth, set lobbying objectives. And then the MPs, because we're quite busy people, it's easier for us if we could just rock up, put our name to something, agree to be part of a cross-party letter or whatever. But the point of an APPG is it can create that platform for cross-party action, and so that would probably be the most effective way.
Thank you, Sarah. Johnny, what would you like to add?
I agree with Sarah, and the APPGs are across Parliament, both the Commons and the Lords. So I think that would be a good way. I think Sarah's absolutely right. You really want an outside organisation because that helps it not being an MP from a particular party who convenes it. I mean, they're all cross-party, these all-party groups anyway. But I would strongly suggest thinking about that. There's other groups, particularly in the Lords. There's a group called Peers for the Planet, which you probably know. But that's a good organisation to be in contact with because they have a lot of members. They put on lots of very influential debates, so they're worth contacting as well.
Thank you both, appreciate that. I think we've actually got time for a couple more quick questions before we round up and finish on time at 7:30. So I'm noticing there's a question in the chat which has come regarding, this might be one for Sarah and Lunnon probably, and then for the people who've got a view as well, of course. There's a question from Jane saying, why is the parliamentary petition on the CEE Bill ailing? I presume she means in terms of numbers, and what can be done to get it back on track and push for a parliamentary debate on the bill?
Yeah, I've been direct messaging a little bit with Jane about this one. So our strategy as a Bill Alliance team, and we are a relatively small group of people, was not to go for a parliamentary petition because parliamentary petitions are usually most successful when you have a plan and a strategy for publicising them. It's a whole piece of work in itself to make it go viral, and that wasn't part of our plan and strategy. 38 Degrees got in touch with us and did ask if we wanted them to hold a petition for us, and they have done that, and they did a lot of work on publicising their petition and getting it out there, and we will do some PR around the 38 Degrees petition. So it may well be that we pick that petition up and start running with it, but it also would be really useful before any big set piece debates happen, or even smaller debates happen in Parliament around the bill, to actually have a totally cross-party support for the bill. So we actually want to bring some Conservatives on board before we actually start having those kinds of debates in Parliament. So yeah, there is a strategy, and the parliamentary petition did not form part of that strategy at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So I'm conscious of time. So what I think I'm going to do is propose that we combine the last question with the kind of my request to ask each of the panelists to reflect on the conversation this evening and offer a couple of minutes kind of roundup on your reflections and key messages you'd like to offer to our audience and to all of the grassroots campaigners who are so desperate for this change to come about. So I'll come to each of you in turn, and I'll just mention this question in case it also sparks some reflections from this evening for you. So a question that's been submitted from Viola is, how can we make sure that the bill is not just another law, but is actually a real step forward in helping our environment to recover? So I guess I just invite you to sort of reflect on that in your summing up points, if that's okay, trying to do two things in one go so that we use the time. And if I may come to Sarah Olney first, any reflections on that question, and indeed and any final messages that you'd like to leave with our audience?
Well, I think you know the CEE bill, as I said at the beginning, I still think its main strength is the fact that it's bringing all of these things together. It's bringing the climate and the ecological emergency together. And I think what really needs to change, and change urgently, is you know, a bringing together of all the different diverse strands of, you know, carbon reduction, environmental improvement, and so on. And to really set, you know, because there's this big, you know, the big goal for net zero carbon by 2050. But no real plan to get there, and that's what that's the change we really need to make. And I think the thing I've really taken from this evening's discussion actually is that there is a lot of talk in Westminster about this. The government have committed to some vague goals. We are all on the same page. But what I think has really struck me tonight is the extent to which we still need to be talking to members of the public about it. And I've obviously talked a lot about how I respond when people come to me with things. I obviously do you know, quite a lot of proactive communication as well, which is a bit of a struggle in the current environment, but you know, generally it's not so much a problem. And I think that is actually maybe the big thing we need to be pressing the government for at this stage, is that big public information campaign. Which we know they're capable of. We've seen it in coronavirus. We've seen it with various other things. But this is a kind of like, this is an emergency, or shall we say, you know, after coronavirus has passed, maybe this is the next emergency, and here's what we need you to do. You know, a kind of like a three-phrase, you know, like save lives, protect the NHS, stay home, you know, something like that, but to address, you know, the new emergency, well, not the new, it's not a new emergency, but, you know, something like that to, you know, to really bring home to people what their responsibilities are, and to catch that mood, as I said earlier, of you know, we all need to be, we need to think about how our behaviour impacts other people. Now we need to think about how our behaviour impacts the environment, and to have it made really clear to every single person what the consequences of not changing our behaviour might be. So I think that's the thing that's really, for me, come out from tonight. Actually, we need to be much more effective at talking to the public about this issue and about what we all need to do about it.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm sure the audience this evening is probably all saying a resounding yes to that. Yes, please, all MPs, all media, all government, tell the truth now. Yes, please. Absolutely. And, you know, I don't know, I'm sure with recent events and the inauguration of President Biden and Kamala Harris, that, you know, the UK is in danger of looking behind the curve pretty quickly, because Biden really gets this, or he appears to really get it.
I think it could be a real game changer. I mean, the first thing he did, or, you know, there was a great picture of him yesterday with that stack of executive orders that he was about to sign. And one of them, as you know, was to recommit the USA to the Paris Agreement, which is obviously fantastic. But I think, you know, he has very, very consciously put climate and addressing the climate emergency at the centre of, you know, his plans for his administration. And, you know, I think the UK is going to have to find a way to kind of respond to that, definitely. Yes. And someone's just said in the chat that we haven't mentioned COP26. We haven't mentioned COP26, but that is really important. And I do think that the UK will try and use that, the fact that we're co-hosting that, as a way to, you know, really build and develop that relationship with the Biden administration. And I think the fact that last week the government have now appointed a minister for COP26, or rather they've, you know, Alok Sharma has now become, you know, is a sign of how more seriously the government are now taking it. and I think that's certainly a welcome change.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm sure there are many of us, or some of us on this listening in, or part of this audience, who are saying, yes, but 2050 is too late, and it's all too late, and carbon budgets run out much sooner, and that's why the bill is like it is, because it's based on the science. So thank you for that. I'll come to Jackie next for your reflections on tonight's session.
Okay. Thank you, Zoe. I mean, we've learned, and we knew already, that government and council processes are slow. And they shouldn't be, because if we're dealing with 2 emergencies, we've just proved with COVID that we can act quickly, within days when we need to. But that unfortunately isn't the way that we're treating the climate ecological emergencies, and of course that is wrong. But we have to carry on. We mustn't stop. We must try every avenue, all of us, right from government MPs, councils, businesses, right down to us as individuals as well. So again, I'd urge you to find out who your local councillors are, start a conversation with them, find which ones are supportive. You can use Teignbridge's template notice of motion. Please, ask, or I'll give it to go on the website. Back up and support your councillors. I think actually what would be really useful for me locally when I try to explain what the bill is about, there's a huge misunderstanding of what a citizens' assembly is, and it would be really useful if perhaps a bit more time could be spent on that. I find parish councillors, saying, our voice won't be heard, and I was elected and I should be heard, and I represent local people. And we just need to explain a bit more carefully what a citizens' assembly is, and what it's going to bring, and why it isn't something that they should be afraid of. Just to emphasize again that everybody has a part to play in this. You may not all want to be a councillor, but I would urge any that have any inkling to do it, please go and find out more, because if we had more people like us in council chambers up and down the country, by gum, this would be easier to achieve. But if that isn't your cup of tea, and I have to accept that my days of sitting in a street are probably over, but if that's, we need you as well, and those that would prefer just to set up a local project, a grassroots project, or set up a local action group, whatever. We're all needed, and let's lobby MPs and government, but let's not forget what we can all do as well. Waiting for government, we've learned, is going to be too late. Waiting for your council might not be too late, because if you get on side with your council, and if you get in that council chamber as well, that could be a bit quicker. But each of us needs to be doing something and acting. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Jackie. Johnny, can I come to you for your closing reflections?
Yeah, thanks, Zoe. I think it's hard to overstate how far behind where we need to be we are right now. And while it's true that we are lucky in the UK that there is a degree of political consensus, and we don't have the sort of difficulties that you have in the States about actually agreeing that something needs to be done, the consensus is around far off targets. It is not around the difficult choices that have to be made to do something about this. There aren't, as Sarah said, the short-term action plans to reach those targets. We're not on course even to meet the 80% reduction that was originally in the Climate Change Act, and we're certainly not on target to meet net zero. And I think politicians have got to start to realise what Martin Luther King called the fierce urgency of now, because otherwise we will be in exactly the position that Sarah Lunnon warned us about, which is we've got this thing, we know it's going to happen, it's up there on our risk register, and we're not doing the things that have to be done. And we cannot afford that. And I think what that means is we've got to do all we can in Parliament, and we've got to do all we can outside Parliament with your help to campaign, and whether that's the sort of Extinction Rebellion type campaigning, or whether it's bringing together church groups and the WI, as Sarah was talking about. But we've got to understand it's not enough just to say this is a crisis that is immediate and a major danger to all of humanity. We've got to convince people. We can't just shout it at them. So I think we just have to redouble all our efforts, do everything we can to galvanize, to get the message out there, to mobilize. And the one thing that I've learned is that while you can't change the world by standing on your own, if you stand with other people, if you get those numbers, if you get that persistence that Sarah talked about, there is just about nothing you can't change. That's what we've got to do.
Johnny, that is totally the right note set for us to bring this to a close. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure and privilege. Thank you to Johnny, to Sarah Olney, Sarah Lunnon, and to Jackie Hook. Thank you all for being a brilliant panel this evening. Thank you to our audience. There's lots of learning here, lots we need to do, lots of passion, lots of purpose, and it's great to know that we have some politicians who feel this too. So thank you for all of your commitments. Thank you to the audience. Please do support the Bill campaign. There's going to be a slide coming up in a second about further things that you can do to support, donate, share, etc., etc. Thank you for joining us. Please do share this video with your friends, families, and others. And have a good evening. Thank you, everyone.